Okay, welcome back, Peter.
Yeah, welcome back. Good to be back. A little under
Yeah,
the weather, but yeah, happy to
shame,
be
yeah.
back.
Are you sounding alright though? So hopefully you'll feel better after this.
Hopefully, the reason I was late, I was like, let me actually stim up before I actually get on this call because yeah,
Yeah, clear
yeah,
up. Um, okay, so episode number 18, another crazy number, but
yeah,
we slowly ticking towards higher numbers. Almost at
yeah,
the, so we almost finished with the teenage years.
yeah. We almost. Yeah, I mean it's an indication that we've been doing this for over a year now.
Yeah,
Because I
well,
mean it's
heading
once a
towards
month.
two.
Heading towards 2, yeah. So it's scary, but yeah, I mean 6 months away from 2
Yeah.
in terms of the number of episodes. But yeah.
No, it's really crazy, but it's good.
Yeah, yeah, it's good. It's the discipline.
Yeah, exactly.
It's all about choices, right?
Ah, nice. Okay, so should I give a quick book summary and then we dig into it?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, cool. So the book we're dealing with is Essentialism by Greg McKeown. So Essentialism by Greg McKeown presents a philosophy centered on the disciplined pursuit of less. The book explores the mindset of an essentialist. Then it outlines a systematic approach for achieving this disciplined pursuit. The core components of this approach are to explore, eliminate, and execute. As McKeown delivers or delves into each of these, he contrasts how the non-essentialist and an essentialist might approach these same situations, offering concrete examples to highlight the differences. So yeah, that's the book summary. Yeah, I don't know if you have any extra comments there, Peter, or if you're ready to dig in.
No, happy to dig in.
Okay, cool. So I was thinking what we could do is the overview of the book is structured quite nicely, so maybe we could just go through each of those sections and pick out like one or so points from each and chat through it.
Yeah, happy with that.
Take it from there. Okay, so I'm going to break the rule almost immediately because in the Essentialist overview section, there's a few parts. But maybe before we get there, just to give people an overview of how the book is structured, it's structured into 4 parts, and each part has a few little... each part has a bunch of chapters, and those chapters are kind of like guides on the part. So the 4 parts are essence, which is what is the core mindset of an essentialist.
Yeah.
Then the next part is explore. So how can we discern the trivial many from the vital few? And then the next part is eliminate. How can we cut out the trivial many? And then the last part is execute. How can we make doing the vital few almost effortless?
Yeah.
So again, it's split into 4, but with the first part being the like core mentality, and then those other 3 are like how do you actually become an essentialist? Yeah. So if we start off with the first part there, on the essentialist page, he's got a quote from Ling Yutang. The wisdom of life consists of the elimination of non-essentials. So yeah, I think that's a really helpful place to start because it's kind of the core idea. Yeah. I don't have much more to add to that.
Yeah, it's straight to the point.
My throat's a little bit groggy as well for some reason.
Shame.
Cool. On page 5, they've got a piece here that says there are far more activities and opportunities in the world than we have time and resources to invest in. And although many of them may be good or even very good, the fact is most are trivial and few are vital. And then a little bit further down, essentialism is not about how to get more done. It's about how to get the right things done. the wisest possible investment of your time and energy in order to operate at the highest point of contribution by doing what is essential.
I think even earlier on that page, it talks about the less but better, because that being like one of the principles of an essentialist. And then, on page 2, I think this is something that's actually addressed later on. It introduces the concept of actually saying no, which is also vital when it comes to being an essentialist. But yeah, we can carry on.
Yeah, I mean that concept of no comes up a few times, and I think there's also a nice illustration of like the almost picture of an essentialist.
Yeah.
So he's got a drawing there
On page
which
6.
has exactly. Which has 2 circles. The one circle has a bunch of arrows pointing out from it. And the other circle has one long arrow. So the lots of arrows are small and the one long arrow is big. And the idea is that the non-essentialist is focused on so many different things that they don't actually have energy to put it in a single direction, because their energy and their thoughts and their like everything is scattered over a bunch of different directions. Whereas the essentialist is ideally, obviously there's an idyllic picture, but they focused on a single direction. And so they can make really good progress in that direction because they're not trying to make progress in a million ways.
But I mean, he also kind of highlights the misconception of that picture where he says, it doesn't mean that, and I mean, I think we do touch this in the Explore chapter, it doesn't mean that essentialists don't actually study or look at different things. They just have the ability to kind of remove what's not important and just stick to the important. Yet with an essentialist, they actually just feel like everything is important. And I think it reminded me of the one book we did about the productivity, that people view being busy as being productive. And I think that's the way of an essentialist. You know, the more they're involved in many things, they feel like they're actually doing a lot more. But that's actually a waste of their time. I think what also is important to me, I highlighted on page 7, it says the way of an essentialist means living by design, not by default. So I feel like that's a very important statement.
Yeah, he says on page 10 basically it's the same thing in different words. Which is, if you don't prioritize your life, someone else will. So if you are living by default, the default was set by someone. Or even if it wasn't a default, the choice was made by someone.
No, that was I mean, if you don't make a choice, someone will make it for you. It was, for me, it was also like a wake up call. You know, like if you avoid something and just go with the flow of things, you might think you're doing things out of will, but it's actually the decision that someone else made, essentially.
Exactly. Yeah, no, it's a very key thing to, like, it's one of the key things from this book is trying to realize that we need to make choices, and we'll dig into that in a few pages down the line. But another is from page 16. There he says the word priority came into the English language in the 1400s and it was singular. It meant the very first and prior thing. It stayed singular for the next 500 years. Only in the 1900s did we pluralize the term and start talking about priorities. And it's an interesting idea because it's kind of like we're missing the point of what a priority is. A priority is a singular thing. And now we've twisted it because we just keep on wanting to take on more and more and more.
It's like at the end of the day, everything is more important.
And if everything's important, nothing's important.
Yeah, and I mean, it was also, I mean, just before leading up to that, it actually mentioned the different things that lead to that. And I mean, it's also stuff that we've encountered over time. You know, it's like, why is non-essentialism everywhere? And it talks about there are too many choices, you know. So people with other discipline to stick to one thing, you know, go crazy with that. Too much social pressure, you know. I think we've spoken about this at length in other books, you know, that people, you know, feel external pressure to actually do things. And then there's also the whole the idea that we can have it all, which is not true.
Yeah.
And yeah, yeah. So that's just what I wanted to add. And also at the bottom of page 16, it talks about at the top of the list, I wish I would have had the courage to live life true to myself, not the life others expected of me. I mean, it's so easy to fall into that trap, you know. We're creatures of habit. We like to please others and actually stay true to ourselves. And yeah, I think it's later mentioned also in the book about that you know, going back to say no, you know, it'll be in that moment that people will be annoyed with you. But I think as humans, we never want to displease people. But at the end of the day, people will get over it and actually respect you more at the end. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think a lot of the book kind of comes down to those difficult choices. But if you want to have that essentialist philosophy, then you have to make those trade-offs. You have to make those choices. On page 20, kind of gives an overview of the core mindset of an essentialist, and in this essence part, the like overview of the core mindset of an essentialist, there's three pieces. He says here, one is individual choice, so how we actually have agency to choose, and then the other is the prevalence of noise. Almost everything is noise, and very few things are exceptionally valuable. And then the last is the reality of trade-offs. Once we accept the reality of trade-offs, we stop asking, how can we make it all work? And we start asking the more honest question, which problem do I want to solve? And then the whole idea of this book is to say, we need to explore, eliminate, execute. And that's how we'll achieve the sort of, I guess, a more fulfilling life or something.
That's the steps to becoming an essentialist. Essentially.
Yes, yeah. Essentially. But yeah, I think that's it for that chapter. Because the rest is kind of stuff that touches on things that we'll cover for the rest of the book. So should we head over to the actual essence chapter? Because that was the initial introduction of the book. Right. Essence. So the first thing I had there was on page 39, which is the I choose to. So this section is all about choice, and the subtitle is the invincible power of choice. And he says here in a sort of summary section, he says, essentialists choose to, non-essentialists say I have to. So I choose to do this versus I have to do this. And essentialists exercise the power of choice, whereas non-essentialists forfeit the right to choose. Again, just that decision idea of like, I decide or someone decides for me. I don't know if you have anything else to add there. It was quite a short section.
Was that you covering the whole section on choice?
Yeah, there's on. Go for it.
No, there was just one thing I wanted to highlight, which is page 35. where
Okay,
it says the choice is an action. It is not just something we have, but something we do. This experience brought me the liberating realization that while we may not always have control of our options, we always have control over how we choose among them. So just in the middle of page 35 there. So yeah, like you said, the power of choice.
Yeah, I think it's a good summary. Right, then the next is discern. So we did choose, then discern, and then the next one's going to be trade-off. So in the discern section, on page 41, there's a quote that says, "Most of what exists in the universe, our actions and all other forces, resources, and ideas, has little value and yields little result. On the other hand, a few things work fantastically well and have a tremendous impact." That's Richard Koch. So, yeah, I think it's something to soak in, because it's an obvious thing, but we find ourselves doing a million different things, and we need to discern what is the important things to do, or what are the important things. I also have, sorry, no, go for it, Peter.
No, go for it.
On page 43, there's the idea of the Pareto principle. So he says here, most people have heard of the Pareto principle, the idea that was introduced as far back as the 1790s by Vilfredo Pareto, that 20% of our efforts produce 80% of the results. Much later, in 1951, in his quality control handbook, Joseph Moses Juron, one of the fathers of the quality movement, expanded on this idea and called it the law of the vital few. His observation was that you could massively improve the quality of a product by resolving a tiny fraction of the problems. Later in the book, there's a part where they talk about production lines and things like that, and the idea of there's things that can be optimized where you can make massive amounts of effort and make virtually no progress, or you can identify the bottlenecks and the constraints, and you can do you can take steps towards removing those constraints, and by just removing those one or two vital things, you can massively improve the performance of a production line. And I think that same idea is applicable in many different spheres of life.
I just had one last thing, which is on the last page, the last paragraph. It says the overwhelming reality is we live in a world where almost everything is worthless and very few things are exceptionally valuable. So, as John Maxwell has written, you cannot overestimate the unimportance of practically everything.
Yeah, very true. Okay, should we head over to the trade-offs? So, on page 52, let's see. So, former CEO of the Lehman Brothers, she wrote, "I didn't start out with the goal of devoting myself to my job. It crept in over time. Each year went by with slight modifications and became the new normal. First, I spent half an hour on Sundays organizing my emails, to-do lists, and calendar to make Monday morning easier. Then I was working a few hours on Sunday, then all day. My boundaries slipped away until work was all that was left." And then he says, "We can either make hard choices for ourselves or allow others, whether our colleagues or our boss or our customers, to decide for us." Yeah, it's that same idea of choice. And the section is in trade-offs. There's another thing that he says here, we can try to avoid the reality of trade-offs, but we can't escape them. And so by choosing to do work or those kinds of things, we're choosing not to spend time with our family or our friends. And
I think, even in the introduction, he had
recommend.
that story of him missing the birth of his daughter because, and the clients had little respect for him after that,
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's actually a really good story. Do you want to just give the
No,
super
high level was
overview of
that I think he had a meeting scheduled on the same day his daughter was being born, and he was at the hospital, but then decided to rush off to go to the client meeting during the same time. And yeah, needless to say that when the clients found out that this is the decision he had made, they were not as impressed as they thought they would be. Personally, you think because I showed up, then the clients should be happy, but you forget that they're also human and they understand the importance of certain things. So I think that was just one of the things that backfired, and it was just an illustration of how he chose the non-essential over what was actually essential in that moment.
Yeah. Yeah, and like it was a mistake that he regrets, obviously, because you should go to your child's birth rather than go to some random business meeting, no matter how important that business meeting might seem at the time. But also it was a helpful thing for him to reflect back on, because I think as far as I understand, it's part of the reason for like getting into the idea of essentialism, because he was like, I can't let this happen again. Like, yeah, it's just not worth it. But yeah. All right, should we go on to the next part? So we just covered essence, and now we're gonna step into the first of the three sort of sections that take us through, like, how do you actually become an essentialist. So we kind of discussed what makes up an essentialist. Now we're going to discuss explore, and then next eliminate, then next execute. So going through explore, the high level idea of explore is how can we discern the trivial many from the vital few, and that's the core part of this chapter, to try and help us to figure out how do we discern those the vital few. All right. The first thing I have is on page 65. So the overview heading is called escape. So the perks of being unavailable. And he says here in a summary, the essentialist creates space to escape and explore. The non-essentialist is too busy doing to think about life. So they're just too busy caught up with life to even think about what they should be doing. Yeah, that's I think the main.
I think with me it was just I didn't have anything specific, but the subtitles within that chapter were actually very important. Like how do you actually get to that point of escaping? And then it has you have a space to design. And then I think on page 66 it says, in order to have focus, we need to escape to focus. And then there's the whole space to concentrate. I think that's also important. And the space to read. So there was nothing specific that jumped out, but like I said, together as a whole, those are things to take note of.
Yeah, no, definitely. I think a lot of the book, because we're going to run through it quite quickly, a lot of it is fairly obvious stuff, I think, but there's a lot of nuance and helpful insight into like how to think about those things, and we'll probably be glossing over a lot of those, but like you say, there's subsections and things, and he gives a lot of like bullet points, not actually in the form of bullet points, but a lot of points of how to approach and tackle different situations and that. Okay, then should we go on to look? So that's the next section. And I've got on page 75, I've got this little section highlighted. The Lockheed jet had been preparing to land when the first officer, Albert Stockstill, noticed that the landing gear indicator, a tiny green light that signals the nose gear is locked down, hadn't lit up. The gear was locked. The problem was the tiny indicator light was not functioning correctly. While the other officers were hyper-focused on the gear, while the officers were hyper-focused on the gear indicator, however, they failed to notice that the autopilot had been deactivated until it was too late. In other words, the nose gear didn't cause the disaster. The crew losing sight of the bigger picture, the altitude of the plane, was what caused the problem. And then he says he's got this idea of being a journalist, and a journalist being someone that sees the bigger picture and identifies the key thing. He says here, being a journalist of your own life will force you to stop hyper-focusing on all the minor details and see the bigger picture. So yeah, I mean, obviously a very tragic incident, but it's one that is helpful to learn from, to say, you know, when things are chaotic, it's always helpful to take a step back for at least a moment to try and see the bigger picture. Because if you get fixated on one thing, you might not realize that there's other issues or bigger issues, or that issue is actually not even really a real issue, but there's something else that's causing that issue, like a phantom pain or something like that. Yeah. See what really matters. Right. Should we go on to the next one? Play. Right. So on 85, I've got so this part is about play and embracing the wisdom of your inner child. And on 85 he says here, play, or this is a quote, so he says, play leads to brain plasticity, adaptability, and creativity. He succinctly puts it, nothing fires up the brain like play. And so, of course, then an essentialist is one who knows that play is essential and knows that play sparks exploration. Because remember, the overarching idea here is explore. So play sparks exploration, whereas a non-essentialist thinks play is a waste of time and play is unproductive, and why would you do things like that? I actually often find myself, not so much anymore, but I used to find myself in the past thinking, you know, like, what is the point of sports? Like, it just seems so silly. And I like sports. I enjoy playing sports and things like that. I don't really watch it much, but I enjoy playing sports. But I used to think, what's the point of it? And now I'm starting to realize more and more that it's actually a vital part of growing as a human, because it's where we learn a lot of different things. We get better at balance. We get better at interacting with people and quickly judging situations to make calls, and all kinds of different skills that continually refine the wiring in our brains to actually be better in general. And yeah, obviously hyper focus on sports and go overboard, as with anything, but there's a vital element of play. Yeah. I don't know if you have any other things
just agreeing that, you know, there's that statement that says, work hard but play harder, you know. I think it links to that, you know, like, we don't need to lose sight of that. And like you said, play helps create other neural pathways in our brain, you know, helps with social interaction and other things that we don't deem important but actually are.
Yeah, and he touches on, like, ideas. You mentioned 3. The one is that broadens the range of available possibilities. So naturally, if we're exploring things and we're messing around and things like that, we stumble across things that we wouldn't have if we were very just focused on some specific path. And so play is vital in that way. And then, and one might think like an essentialist wouldn't say that, because like you need to focus on one thing. But the key is that he's saying, no, an essentialist isn't someone who focuses on one thing at the beginning. They first look at all of these trivial many things, and then they try and discern and figure out what is the important thing. And one of the keys to doing that is play, because it helps you explore a wider landscape of things. And then once you've chosen something down the line, then focus on that thing. But you need to explore first, otherwise you won't know what the options are. Then the second thing he says is that it's an antidote to stress. He gives a nice example where he says, I've even seen play reverse these effects in my own children. When they're stressed and things feel out of control, I get them to draw. When they do, the change is almost immediate. The stress melts away and the ability to explore is regained. And I think that's a great, simple insight. It's like you have a stressful day at work and you go and play a game of, I don't know, soccer or tennis or something with friends. Yeah. And you kind of forget about all of that other stuff. And you come back refreshed and yeah, it's just helpful. And then the last one is that play has a positive effect on the executive function of the brain. The brain's executive functions include planning, prioritizing, scheduling, anticipating, delegating, deciding, analyzing. In short, most of the skills that any executive must master in order to excel in business. Play stimulates the parts of the brain involved in both careful planning, logical reasoning, and carefree, unbound exploration. So, yeah, I guess, summary, play is important. Cool. Should we go to the next one? Sleep. I don't have a crazy amount of stuff here. I think the only thing is they're on page 96, which is just his summary, which the essentialist knows that 1 hour of sleep equals several hours of much higher productivity, and that sleep breeds creativity. So, whereas the non-essentialist would say, okay, but I can work more hours, and so why should I sleep more? But the essentialist would say, well, if you sleep more, you're going to be more productive, and so it's a good investment of time. And he gives an example of violinists and how the best violinists actually sleep more and nap more. So, yeah. Okay, then the next is select. So again, we're still in that section of exploring. And then this is the final part, which is select. On page 103, he's got a Twitter leader apparently once put, if the answer isn't a definite yes, then it should be a no.
Yeah, I think with that, it was just, as humans, we often make excuses for things. You know, we think saying no is bad, but don't realize that it helps, you know, without what's not important to what it is that you're doing, you know. I mean, even the following page, it has that whole 90 that if it falls within a certain criteria, you have to be strict with your criteria. If it's below something, then you know that then that's not important, essentially, you know.
Yeah. So he's like, rate something and its level of importance, rate it between 0 and 100%. And if it falls below 90,
Yeah.
then it's an instant 0.
Yeah.
So it's
0,
either
yeah.
90 or above or 0. And he says here, related to that, the benefits of this ultra-selective approach to decision-making in all areas of our lives should be clear. When our selection criteria are too broad, we will find ourselves committing to too many options. What's more, assigning simple numerical values to our options forces us to make decisions consciously, logically, and rationally, rather than impulsively or emotionally. Yes, it takes discipline to apply the tough criteria, but failing to do so carries a high cost. And he gives a few examples, and some of them are fairly obvious examples. But I mean, if you think about hiring people as one example, if you don't have that sort of fairly strict criteria, and you're like, yeah, maybe this person is all right, then you end up hiring someone who now they cause you trouble potentially for the rest of time, and it's difficult to fire them, and etc., etc. But if you have just very strict criteria, then you can say, okay, like, look, unfortunately, no, it's just, it is what it is. They're not in that 90% or above. And the same thing with work and things like projects that we want to take on. If we think that it's not going to have a meaningful impact for us or be meaningful to us, if we think like, oh, it kind of will be nice, but we're not super committed to it, it's going to consume up unnecessary resources and that. So we need to be very discerning and select with those extreme criteria.
Yeah. I mean, I think you already mentioned this, but on page 109, there's a whole, if it's not a clear yes, then it's a clear no. Just thought it was worth reiterating that.
Exactly. Yeah, I mean, that's the key summary. Cool. Okay, should we head on to the next section, eliminate? So that was explore. And now eliminate is how can we cut out the trivial many. So we kind of touched on a little bit in the previous section, but this is focused on that cutting things out. And the first part of that is clarify. So one decision makes 1,000, or one decision that makes 1,000. And on page 126, on page 125, he kind of has this idea of essential intent. So if you think about a company, what is the company's essential intent? What are they striving towards? And he says you get a few different types of things. You get vision and mission statements, you get values, and you get quarterly objectives. Vision and mission fall almost a bit too much towards the inspirational side. And values are a bit like too bland and very general, and then quarterly objectives are almost on the too concrete side. That's not to say any of those things are terrible, but he's saying what we really want is to have something that's both inspirational and very concrete, and that's what he calls an essential intent. And the whole idea behind the essential intent is it's almost like a statement that is made that guides people's decisions. So if you were to have one personally, it should guide your personal decisions. If a company were to have one, it should guide the company's decisions. And then on page 126, he says, an essential intent on the other hand is both inspirational and concrete, both meaningful and measurable. Done right, an essential intent is one decision that settles 1,000 later decisions. It's like deciding you're going to become a doctor instead of a lawyer. One strategic choice eliminates a universe of other options and maps a course for the next 5, 10, or even 20 years of your life. And then he gives a summary there. For the essentialist, they have a strategy that's concrete and inspirational, meaningful and memorable, and it makes 1,000 decisions by making a single decision.
I mean,
Yeah.
what jumped out for me was in that later section when he talks about the different companies, and it's the whole with like the measurable aspect, and it's something that I always ask people. I mean, I haven't asked it in a while, but people always say, "Oh, I want to change companies because I want to earn more money," right? I don't disagree that, yes, but I always feel like that's a shift in goalposts, because you always want more money. You need to have a cap to that, because when you just leave it in the air like that, you always want more money. And I mean, it then introduced the one organization with like 2 or 3 people that the mission statement was end world hunger or something, and then there was I think it's Brad Pitt's NPO, which was like, no, he needs to construct 150 structures. There was a means to an end with regards to his statement, which was, like I said, concrete, both meaningful and was measurable, that you knew at what point you had succeeded or had finished,
Exactly, yeah. And it's he even mentions there that it's surprising that Brad Pitt is the one that had you have all these business people, and then you have Brad Pitt. And I mean, it's funny, there's a lot of like actors and famous people that have these things on the side, and you sometimes realize how smart they are. I have no idea if Brad Pitt is smart or not. It seems like from this he's at least got some ideas that are good. And Ashton Kutcher and that, I don't know him very well as well, but apparently he's good with investing and doing different things. And so Brad Pitt's, just to read that essential intent that you were mentioning, he says here, it's to build 150 affordable, green, storm-resistant homes for families living in the lower 9th ward. So that's like extremely, extremely precise and clear. And it's a thing that eliminates lots of different decisions. So it's not like, okay, where are we going to build them? How many are we going to build? Are we going to build homes that are they going to be green homes or not? It sort of eliminates all of those decisions for one. And then the people can now focus on, okay, how much money do we need for that? Because we know exactly what our target is. How long is it going to take? What resources do we need? All of those kinds of things. And so I think that's a great essential intent. Last thing maybe to mention there is that he has 2 suggestions for is it 3? Let me check. Yeah. 2 suggestions for creating an essential intent. So he says here, so how can we craft a statement of purpose that's both concrete and inspiring, meaningful and memorable? And the first thing he says is stop wordsmithing and start deciding. In summary, he says an essential intent doesn't have to be elegantly crafted. It's the substance, not the style, that counts. And then 2, ask, how will we know when we're done? A powerful essential intent inspires people partially because it's concrete enough to answer the question, how will we know when we have succeeded? Yeah. And I think the Brad Pitt example is a great one. Like once they've built 150, they've succeeded. And obviously in that specific area, etc., etc. But they know when they've completed it. And so I think those 2 are very helpful tips to get that essential intent written down. And it's interesting because he uses the word inspiring, but we wouldn't associate to build 150 affordable green storm-resistant homes for families living in the lower 9th ward as an inspiring statement. It's like, well, it's on the surface seems pretty bland, but going back to those 2 points, it's not about the fancy words that are used. It's the reason why it's inspiring is because it gives an end goal to reach towards that is clear. And that's what makes it inspiring. Yeah. All right. So we go on to dare. So the power of the graceful no. I've got something on 136. So he says, yeah.
Before we get there, I had something on 132. It says, I did not set out to write this chapter about courage, but the deeper I've looked at the subject of essentialism, the more clearly I've seen courage as key to the process of elimination. Without courage, the disciplined pursuit of less is just lip service. So, yeah, like I said, it's, as humans, we don't want to disappoint, so saying no is like the furthest thing from what we want to say. Yeah.
But we shouldn't just be paying lip service. We should, if we say yes, we should mean it and want to do it. Think it's valuable. So on 136 he says, a true essentialist, Peter Drucker, believed that people are effective because they say no. And then he says, non-essentialists say yes because of the feelings of social awkwardness and pressure. So it's very similar to what you were saying. They say yes automatically without thinking, and often in pursuit of the rush one gets from having pleased someone. But essentialists know that after the rush comes the long pang of regret. They know that they will soon feel bullied and resentful, both at the other person and themselves. Eventually they will wake up to the unpleasant reality that something more important must now be sacrificed to accommodate this new commitment. And then on 137, he says, denying the request is not the same as denying the person. Only once we separate the decision from the relationship can we make a clear decision and then separately find the courage and compassion to communicate it. And then he says also, last thing, he says also, saying no gracefully doesn't mean saying the word no. Essentialists choose no more than they say no. For example, you could say, I'd very much like to, but I'm overcommitted.
Yeah, no, just going back to about separate the decision from the relationship. I know this is off tangent, but I think it's something we looked at in one of the books about not taking criticism about your work as a personal reflection. This is one of those that you're not saying no because you don't like the person, or in one form or another has to impact your relationship, but you say no because you don't have the ability to do something.
An ability or time in that sense. Okay, then uncommit. So that's the next one. Win big by cutting your losses. And
I should say, just before you move on, there is a very important guide on page 140 that, if people get the book, maybe it's something to actually go through. I think what caught my attention is the whole thing of, let's say if your superior comes to you and asks you, do this, and then you ask them, what is it you want me to deprioritize, for me to do this, I thought that was a useful list that I won't go through it, but
it says it's the repertoire for saying no.
No repertoire, But we can.
It's a helpful list.
We can move on to uncommit.
Cool. And there's a lot of things like that in the book, as mentioned earlier, where he gives tips and tricks for how to approach certain things. So it's definitely a worthwhile read. So in the uncommits section, the one part in 146 is the idea of sunken costs. So I think we've discussed this a few times before, but the broad overview of sunken cost bias is the tendency to continue to invest time or money or energy into something we know is a losing position simply because we've already incurred or sunk a cost that cannot be recouped. And then on the next page, he says the essentialist asks, if I weren't already invested in this project, how much would I invest in it now? And they think, what else could I do with this time or money if I pulled the plug now? And an essentialist is also someone who is comfortable with cutting losses. I think it's a fairly simple but very powerful thing, because
I agree.
We don't easily give up our sunk costs.
Yeah, no, we don't.
Yeah. And it can be something as simple as, like, he gives the example of someone who's committed to 2 different ski trips.
Yeah.
And the one was cheaper, but the cheaper one people suspected that they would enjoy more, and the more expensive one they expected that they'd enjoy less. And then they had booked both, and most people would give up the cheaper option, even though they think they would enjoy it more, because they paid more for the more expensive option. Which is, obviously, if you just ignore the cost and you just say, which one do you think you'd enjoy more, then you should go to the one that you think you'd enjoy more. But as soon as we've got some sunken cost in there, then that changes our decision. Even when most likely it shouldn't. Cool. There's a last thing on that section where he talks about prototyping on page 153, and the idea of a prototype being something that people have picked up and they use to test run an idea or a project before making a huge investment up front. But he's got this idea, or he gets this idea from what Daniel Shapiro calls a reverse pilot. So instead of a MVP or prototype, the reverse pilot is the idea of you test whether removing an initiative or activity will have negative consequences. So a common example there would be like a process at a company that you just find yourself doing because that's how it's always been done. But if you remove that process, or he uses the example of a report that was written that takes hours to generate this report and wastes a lot of people's time, which it wouldn't be a waste of time if the report is valuable, but it turned out that people weren't really using the report. So in that case, identifying, like, is this really actually still needed? And if it's not, then eliminate it. So test out what you can remove. All right. Should we go to the edit one? So on the edit one, I have on page 160, Alan D. Williams observed in his essay, What is an Editor?, that there are 2 basic questions that an editor should be addressing to an author. What are you saying? Or are you saying what you want to say? And are you saying it as clearly and as concisely as possible? So, I think those principles can be applied in general, which is, are the things that you're saying or the things that you're doing, are they the things that you want to be saying or doing? And are you doing it or saying it in a way that's as concise as possible? Because often we will do things or say things in a very verbose way because we want to sound fancy, or we want to look busy, or that kind of thing. But we should edit those, and we should try and get it done as efficiently as possible, and make sure that it is something that we ought to be doing and we want to be doing.
No, I think going through that, it actually reminded me of my first ever draft of my my treatise when it came back with so many reds, you know.
Mm.
And then just by the end of my master's, realizing that as much as you're telling a story, you have to be straight to the point, you know, like so many words do not actually deliver the point across. You might actually be creating a lot of room for people to get lost, you know. And I mean, the one subsection was correct. You know, it says an editor's job is not just to cut or condense, but also to make something right, you know. I think
make corrections.
Yeah, I think we underestimate the importance of editing. And I mean, he even mentions how there's a correlation, I think, between movies that win Best Picture to Best Editor.
Yes.
You know, but often, like, none of the editors are actually known. You know, no one ever pays attention to them, but they're the ones that make sure that things come together nicely.
Yeah, it's the underappreciated things, but they kind of just they in the background and they happen, and it's only if things aren't well edited that you start to notice. But if it's well edited, it sort of fades away. Right, should we go on to the next one? Limit. So I like this section. So it's about the freedom of setting boundaries. So on page 166, he says here, non-essentialists tend to think of boundaries as constraints or limits on things that get in the way of their hyper-productive life, whereas essentialists, on the other hand, see boundaries as empowering. They recognize that boundaries protect their time from being hijacked and often set them free from the burden of having to say no to things that where there are other people's objectives. So, the essentialist basically seeing the boundaries as empowering, and I think that's a very helpful idea. And then he carries on the next page. He says, I'm not saying that people should never help other people. We should serve and love and make a difference in the lives of others, of course. But when people make their problem our problem, we aren't helping them, we're enabling them. Once we take their problem from them, all we're doing is taking away their ability to solve it. So that reminds me of the idea of if you're raising a child, you'll get parents who they either because their child is putting up a fuss or because they think that they're helping their child, they will do their homework for them and things like that. Or if their child is struggling, they'll do their homework so that they get better marks with their homework and stuff. But actually what they're doing there is, like he says here, once we take away their problem, all we're doing is taking away their ability to solve it. So they never learn how to actually solve the problem themselves. And I think that can happen in many different ways. If you're wanting to get something done quickly, you can, and you already know how to do it, you can take that on. But you're robbing people of their chance to grow and learn how to solve their own problems. There's a last comment there on the boundaries idea. And it's a little story that he's got on page 169. He says, this truth is demonstrated elegantly by a story of a school located next to a busy road. At first, the children played only on a small swath of the playground, close to the building where the grown-ups could keep their eyes on them. But then, when someone constructed a fence around the playground, now the children were able to play anywhere and everywhere in the playground. Their freedom, in effect, more than doubled. So it's, I think, a helpful picture for actually like visualizing how when you put up a boundary, then there can actually be more freedom because you allowed to just, where the boundary that you can explore up to is. Whereas if you don't have that boundary in place, then you might need to stay closer to the hypothetical parent. Yeah. So set some boundaries and help people by not helping them too much.
Yeah, I think that's something I think I need to get better at.
We can all improve. Okay. Should we go on to the last part of the 3?
Yeah.
So we covered essence earlier, then we covered explore most recently, and now eliminate is the final one. And the question is, how
execute
can we cut?
Is the final.
Sorry. Let me rerun through. So essence is part 1. Explore is the first part of
the steps,
sort of process, the steps. Yeah. So explore, then eliminate, and then execute. Sorry. So how can we cut out making, or how can we make doing the vital few things almost effortless? Yeah. I've got the intro part here. He says, while non-essentialists tend to force execution, essentialists tend to invest the time they have saved by eliminating the non-essentials and designing a system to make execution almost effortless. Yeah. Use the time that you saved to build out systems, and that will then continue to save you time in the future. So
I should say, reading this section reminded me of Atomic Habits.
yes, 100% agree. It's funny, this whole book, it's reminded me of the 4,000 Weeks book, because the idea is kind of we are finite. We can't actually do an infinite amount of things. So we have to choose what is important to us. And I think a very core part of this book is to do that, to choose what is the important thing. And then also very much the Atomic Habits, especially a little bit in the earlier chapters, but like you said, in this section, it very much reminded me of that as well. Okay, should we look at the different parts of this? So the first part is buffer. So he's got here on page 79, the essentialist builds a buffer for unexpected events and practices extreme and early preparation. One of the things that he says a little bit later, which I really like, is the way of the essentialist on the other. So he mentions a bunch of things, and he says the way of the essentialist on the other hand is to use the good times to create a buffer for the bad times. So one example was like a country makes a whole bunch of money from oil rush or something like that, and the one country spends all the money and the other country saves that money. So if you all of a sudden experience a massive success or something like that, whether it's wealth or status or I don't know what it is, then especially on the wealth side, if you experience a big amount of money coming in or something, generally what we'll do is we'll just spend the money. But you should take that sort of luck or whatever you call it and put it towards making things in the future easier rather than getting the nice things right now. Buffer for those hard times. Yeah. I don't know if you have anything else there.
No.
On the buffer section.
No, it's essentially what you mentioned. I think the one that was interesting was the whole him driving without having to stop. That was a good example that him and his child his children were driving to the store and they had a bet to drive without stopping, and like one way was to have a buffer. But I mean, he realized that the moment he gets distracted, he gets closer and that, and then
to the car ahead of him.
And then there was also the one of this is to do with planning ahead, you know, where the one mother that always used to pack things last minute whenever they're going for trips, and always realize when they get there that they've forgotten stuff. But then when she started preparing like a week beforehand, she realized they were able to leave on time and actually never got frustrated with the traffic and got to their destination at the estimated time. So building those buffers can also, in good case scenarios, will give you time to actually do other things in case you will be right on time.
Yeah, no, it's a helpful one. And I think if we don't build in the buffers, then we often underestimate how much time we need, and we don't build those buffers in. Related to that, he says here on page 182, of the variety of explanations for why we underestimate the amount of time something will take, I believe social pressure is the most interesting. One study found that people estimated anonymously how long it would take to complete the task, and when they did that, they were no longer guilty of the planning fallacy. This implies that often we actually know we can't do things in a given time frame, but we won't admit it to someone else. So, it's just interesting to like that human psychology side of things, where we when dealing with projects and things, we often underestimate how much time it's going to take, because we kind of, want to impress someone or something. But intrinsically, we kind of know like roughly how long something will take. But we always I could do it in this amount of time. Yeah. Okay, then the next one is subtract. So in the subtract, he's got the quote from Lao Tzu. Says, to attain knowledge, add things every day. To attain wisdom, subtract things every day. I like that quote. It's wise, I think. So on page 185, let me just open it there. There's a part that says, back. Oh, sorry, no, on 190. 190. There's a section that says here, the essentialist focuses on constraints or obstacles we need to improve, but how do they do that? The first is to be clear about the essential intent. And he says, and that's the essential intent idea that we spoke about earlier with the Brad Pitt example. He says, we can't know what obstacles to remove until we're clear on the desired outcome. When we don't know what we're really trying to achieve, all change is arbitrary. So ask yourself, how will we know when we are done? And the next is to identify the slowest hiker. So the slowest hiker is this idea that he presented a little bit earlier, where there's a group of kids going on a hike, and they keep on having this issue of the foster kids just keep on going very far ahead, and eventually they realize like, okay, they can put the faster the kids, the further back they should go. So put the slowest kid in front, and then the faster one behind them, and then the faster one behind them, etc. And that way everyone was grouped together. And then they could make a further optimization to say, okay, the slowest person, let's try and reduce the load on them as much as possible. So take off their backpack and carry it for them and spread that load across different people and things like that. And so that's the idea of identifying the slowest hiker. And then
Yeah.
lastly is removing the obstacle. So that's the idea of taking those other parts away from them to help that slowest hiker become faster, which would then in turn make the whole team faster. The factory analogy as well works there, to make that one part of the bottleneck of the factory, make that
I should
faster,
say,
make
sorry, it
everything
was
faster.
just a little, my PC was going to my car. Yeah, but that was one of my favorite sections in the book there. Identify the slowest hiker, hiker. I mean, there's always, as a team, you're as fast as the slowest person, and I mean, it got me thinking, and that is in many aspects of our lives, so yeah, it's the moment you try and better things for the person, I don't want to use the term struggling or the person falling behind, the better the whole team kind of benefits at the end of the day.
Yeah. Very true. Yeah. No, I think it was a really helpful analogy. I really like the factory analogy as well, but the factory analogy is used quite often. So the slowest hiker idea was also quite a good one. Cool. Should we go on to the progress section? So he says here, the idea of progress is the power of small wins. And on 93, he quotes Doug Fireborough. I don't know how to say that name, but the quote is, "Every day, do something that will inch you closer to a better tomorrow." And I think this is one of those key parts that reminded us of Atomic Habits.
Yeah.
Take those small steps, basically. So he says on 95, the way of the essentialist is different. Instead of trying to accomplish it all and all at once and flaring out, the essentialist starts small and celebrates progress. Instead of going for the big flashy wins that don't really matter, the essentialist pursues the small, simple wins in areas that are essential. They start small and they get big results. They celebrate small acts of progress. And then lastly, on 196, he says, research has shown that all forms of human motivation, the most effective one is progress. Why? Because small concrete wins creates momentum and affirms our faith in further success. Frederick Heisenberg reveals research showing that two primary internal motivations for people are achievement and recognition for achievement. And then he concludes with, instead of starting big and then flaring out with nothing to show for it, other than time and energy wasted, to get really essential things done, we need to start small and build momentum. Then we can use that momentum to work towards the next one, and the next one, and so on, until we have a significant breakthrough. And when we do, our progress will have become so frictionless and effortless that the breakthrough will seem like an overnight success.
Yeah, I was like, when I was reading this, I was thinking to myself, I had one of those weeks where I'd just been struggling with this ticket I was working on, and like, I think that was Wednesday, like, eventually, like, things started, like, falling into place, and, like, I actually started feeling better to be like, oh, actually, like, got this working. And, like, then the Thursday, there was, like, another roadblock. I was just like, oh, but then eventually solved that again. So, like, it was the small wins, and I think it was one of those weeks that I needed a win, and that was very helpful.
Keep you going.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's. I think also that this section. I think that Essentialism was written before Effortless, because we read Greg McKeown's Effortless a while back, so we've got an episode on that. But I think that this book was written after this, and every now and again he mentions this Effortless here. So that part of saying, and then when we do, our progress will have become so frictionless and effortless that the breakthrough will seem like an overnight success. So yeah, just interesting to see those things pop up. All right. Should we go to the next one? Flow. The word Mihai, Csikszentmihalyi Mihai is famous for. So, page 206, I've got points on his summary. So he says here, the essentialist designs a routine that enshrines what is essential, making execution almost effortless, and it makes the essential the default position. And then he says, making it look easy. Routine is one of the most powerful tools for removing obstacles. With routine, the pull of the non-essential distractions will overpower us. But if we create a routine that enshrines the essentials, we begin to execute them on autopilot. And then lastly, on 208, instead of spending our limited supply of discipline on making the same decisions again and again, embedding our decisions into our routine allows us to channel that discipline towards some other essential activity.
I was gonna say this is where it also started kicking in of atomic habits. So it's like make it look easy. It's like make it obvious. Overhaul your triggers. It's like more of one of those things where like putting things in, like, the whole, if you want to read 10 pages before bed, you leave the book on your pillow, in the morning, and those kind of things. So, but the power of routine. And I mean, it also goes on to say that when you sort of form a routine, you don't have to think much about stuff, which then gives your brain a lot more capacity to form other neural pathways, So importance of routine, I guess.
Yeah, it reminds me as well of the War of Art, that other book that we read, where there's the idea of the writer and looking for inspiration. Writers are always looking for inspiration, and then the guy says that inspiration strikes at exactly 9 a.m. or something like that. And it's just that idea of routine. Once you get into that routine, that's the thing that's going to help you to make that good progress. Because with most things in life, consistency is the key. So, okay, should we go on to focus? So, on 215, the quote from I'm not going to be able to say the person's name. Thich Nhat Hanh. Apologies to that person. But the quote is, life is available only in the present moment. If you abandon the present moment, you cannot live the moments of your daily life deeply. So, the idea is just focusing on now, the present moment, and what's important.
Yeah, I also don't. But I think it was just a reminder, that the present is what's important, worrying about the future or things that have happened in the past just robs you of the present moment, And I mean, as it says on 218, essentialist mind is focused on the present, choosing to what is important right now and enjoys the moment. I think that's what we will need to strive to do,
there's a lot of things where we don't focus on what's happening right now. And again, going back to the 4,000 weeks ideas of when you're washing dishes or doing things like that, if you are present, you can enjoy things a lot more. Even those sort of trivial things that don't really feel like valuable, but we have to do them. And so we might as well enjoy doing them. But we can't really do that without being present. If we constantly focused on other things, it's like being stuck in traffic or something. If we constantly focused on, I have to get there, then we can't actually really enjoy the moment and be present. And yeah, it's just not good. I think that ties nicely into the last one,
B.
Which is B, and it's how to be an essentialist, or how to live an essentialist life. And there's a great quote by Socrates on the start of that, on page 225. Beware of the barrenness of a busy life. So Socrates always coming strong with the quotes there. The barrenness of a busy life. I think that's one to ponder over for a bit. But looking at the other parts, I'll leave people to ponder over that. But looking at the other parts, so there's 227. Henry David Thoreau, who wrote, "I do believe in simplicity. It is astonishing as well as sad how many trivial affairs even the wisest thinks he must attend to in a day. So simplify the problem of life, distinguish the necessary and the real." So just another reminder to distinguish the trivial many from the vital few. And then on page 232, I've got that. So this is Greg saying, "I continue to discover almost daily that I can do less and less in order to contribute more." I think we often overcomplicate things, and we do things that are unnecessary and in ways that are unnecessary, and then we pat ourselves on the back for all the complexity that we've built. But actually, we could strip away all of that complexity, and we probably would produce something more valuable. But it's difficult not to. And I think that's very, in software development, it's a very powerful idea to realize, because there's so many new technologies and different things that we get lost in. And there's lots of helpful things to new technologies, but instead of solving the actual problem that needs to be solved, we get sort of stuck in solving these technical solutions that actually don't have much value. So, Then the last things I have is on 235 and 237. So on 235, he says, "Here are some ways that the disciplined pursuit of less can change your life for the better." So he says, 1, it'll give you more clarity. As you continue to clear out your wardrobe of life, you will experience a reordering of what really matters. Life will become less about efficiently crossing off what's on your to-do list or rushing through everything on your schedule, and more about what you put on in the first place. And then the second part is more control. You'll feel less and less a function of other people's to-do lists and agendas, because remember that if you don't prioritize your life, someone else will. So in other words, like he says, you'll get more control. And then lastly, he says more joy in the journey. With a focus on what's truly important right now comes the ability to live more fully in the moment. Don't know if you have anything to add to that.
No, I don't.
Cool. Then I think the conclusion is a helpful one to wrap up with in terms of the book. There's another last section, but we can leave that one. It's called Leadership Essentials. But it's just like an appendix that he has. And it's kind of it kind of summarizes the leadership essentials with the perspective of the book, like do focus on the vital things, etc. But the thing that he wraps up this Be an Essentialist section with is he says, "If you take one thing away from this book, I hope you will remember this. Whatever decision or challenge or crossroads you face in your life, simply ask yourself what is essential and eliminate everything else." Yeah. What are some concluding thoughts, Peter?
I mean, as usual, if you can read the book. But yeah, just it had a lot of good nuggets. Yeah, I mean, like I said, it had a lot of overlapping ideas from different books that we've read before. But yeah, I think what still stands out for me is like just the ability to say no, but not in a bad light, like. And I think the thing here to clear doesn't mean as a essentialist you don't look at everything else. You actually do. You are open to different ideas, but you just don't jump the first idea. You make a full analysis of the different possibility and go with the best option. I mean, even the one section it talks about that one lady that had a wedding 3 weeks after her conference, and she put in hours to have the presentation out. But then the manager was like, "Oh, you're able to do this. Here's more work for you to do." And the moment she said no, the manager was like shocked initially, but then realized what, again, like I said, the first response is negative, but then later down the line, people will respect you for your decision. You don't have to be a walkover, essentially. But yeah, that's just my...
Yeah, and I think especially if you have that like sort of idea of an essential intent and like this is what the reason for why you are saying no is, and you're very clear about that, and then you can be resilient in saying no. You're like, it doesn't matter if they ask me again. Like I know why I'm saying no to this thing, and yes to these other things. And I think from my side, just trying to incorporate being an essentialist more into life. I find those kind of phrases a bit cheesy, but the general concepts I think are really good, and I think that they are obvious, but it's very difficult to apply them in real life. And I think just taking small steps towards applying them and slowly building that up, I think will be very helpful. And I think another important thing is more and more just realizing the importance of things like family and friendship and putting time aside for that. It's not to say you should spend absolutely every second with them and never do work. I think it's good to do work, and I think it's good to do things that aren't just purely spending time with family and community. But I think often in the modern world, it's easy to neglect doing that and spending time with family and friends because there's so many distractions, and we get lost in the trivial many. And so I think one of those things is just realizing like that there are only so many things in life that we can do, and one of the things that I think is very important is that community, family, friends.
Cool.
All right. Thanks, Peter.
Thanks, James.
Until next time.